Hi everyone! I just wanted to spend a few moments finishing up what we didn't have a chance to cover at the end of class today. I wanted to go over a few things regarding cognitive and social development with you. I'm going to do a little screen sharing here so you can see the Canvas shell and see some of the PowerPoints. So I wanted to point out that I did update to the most recent version I have of that first PowerPoint, so the one on physical development. So I have a few additional slides with some of the areas of the brain that we had mentioned today when you looked at your brain models, and things like the upstairs and downstairs brain to help you to remember that you have a primal downstairs brain that is the most active when you're younger. So everything's about survival, everything is about those necessary involuntary functions, regulating and being able to manage our experience of fear and anger and being able to denote those in others. And then you have that upstairs brain, which is more of the higher ordered portion of your brain, the cortex of the prefrontal lobe, and some of that executive functioning that we started to talk about. So I have a few additional slides there to help you to remember some of those concepts in that PowerPoint as well. Okay, so for cognitive development, I wanted to spend a little bit of time pointing out some of the tenets of Jean Piaget's cognitive development theory. So he is really the gold standard for even today what we consider to be our fundamental understanding of how children think in really radically different ways than children in other age groups. So children, as they progress to maturity, really approach problem solving, they approach critical thinking, they approach their understandings of the world in very different ways. So a 3-year-old is thinking about the world in a very different way than a 13-year-old is, than a 33 or a 43-year-old is. So Piaget's cognitive development theory was based off of a series of experiments where he conducted based off of presenting different problems and tasks for children to solve, and then he observed and questioned and recorded how they went about solving these problems that he presented them with. And so he started to base his theory off of this idea that the world is sort of constructed based off of understandings that children develop as they grow, and they have more enriching experiences with the world around them. So he looked at children as being almost scientists in a way. So as a scientist, I engage in a lot of trial and error. And so that is a lot of how children approach learning about the world around them. They're interacting with it. They're discovering what the result of a certain action is. And so by gathering information and collecting data on these differences and the commonalities among the differences at different ages, this theory started to come to life, and it's been used even today to help us in developing the educational system that we know today, to help us in knowing how to provide educational support and interventions for children early on in their schooling, for us to be able to understand when a child maybe is behind in their development, if they're not able to assess or approach problem solving in the ways that we have seen in Piaget's theory, that would be an indicator that, okay, this child maybe needs some help getting to where we need them to be for their age group. So it is really a great assessment tool that's been used over the years. And if you're going into education, if you're going into working in early child care, for instance, Piaget will be a name that you will continually hear and learn about. And so he believed that we have these experiences in the world and we build up what are called schemas. So he looked at a schema as being almost like a script. So an actor in a movie will get a script of all the lines that they're supposed to say and all the actions that they're supposed to perform. And so Piaget believed that the more interactions we have with the world, these sort of teach us about what we should be expecting about these similar things the next time that we interact with them. So For instance, you may have a schema for coming to my class. You know that you come to my class and I'm going to tell really bad jokes and you're going to learn about some developmental theories and things. You'll take notes and then you'll go home. You have scripts for everything. You have scripts for the people in your life. You may have some stereotypical scripts. Stereotypes are certainly a portion of what a schema could be, but they're expectations based off of your history with these things in your life so far. So when we're very young, our schemas are they're pretty bland, right? They're pretty empty. But as we get in the world and we start going to school and we have siblings and we start to have friendships and relationships and we build up those interpersonal connections, those schemas start to become very rich and very full. So we adapt these schemas through our experiences, and then we use them to figure out what's going on in the world. So we use them as a tool to understand who and what is going on around us. But we also have to accommodate them from time to time. And on this slide, I have a picture of a person with a tattoo sleeve and a doctor's lab coat, just as an example of a good friend of mine who I went to college with years ago who was in a horrible car accident. And lucky for her, there was a very skilled physician at the ER that night and he saved her life. And my friend happened to have what I would call a sort of negative schema regarding people with tattoos. So she looked at people with tattoos as being maybe social deviants, they were up to no good. And so about a year after her accident, we're in a bar near campus and we run into the ER physician who saved her, except he's in regular street clothes. He's not in his scrubs and he has tattoos everywhere. So my friend had built this schema. She had adapted a schema of people with tattoos, and that could have been based off of her family's attitudes or the culture or the background that she grew up in regarding what she was taught about people with tattoos, or maybe some things that she internalized through the media. She assimilated them, she used them to make judgments and to decide how she was going to act around people with tattoos. But eventually she had to accommodate that schema. She had to change it and modify it based off of a new experience that didn't fit into the old schema. So people with tattoos being social deviants, being uneducated, that could no longer fit. So we have to continually go in and modify and start to make some changes when our schemas don't work for us anymore. So Piaget is a stage theory, so he looks at development at very distinct, abrupt stages. And so the first stage he says that we go through in becoming cognitively mature is the sensory motor stage. So this is the first 2 years of life. And so he says from birth to the beginning of those toddler years, we're really experiencing the world through our senses. So it's gaining all the sensory information and acting on the environment through using muscle movement and motor movement is what's going to teach us and help us to build up those primary schemas. So we're not really reasoning at this stage, we're just acting on the environment, right? Trial and error, we're little scientists. We're starting to internalize language though, so we're starting to realize there are symbols and that there are different types of input that go along with language. So that the red, shiny thing that mom cuts up for me for at lunchtime, that's called an apple. An apple starts with the letter A, right? So we're starting to internalize our world through symbolic meaning and not just physical meaning. We should also acquire what's called object permanence before the age of 6 months. So object permanence is the discovery that children have to make that some things exist in the world whether or not they're interacting with them. So for instance, even though I can't see my car right now in the parking lot, I know that it's there, or I hope that it's still there. So even though I can't directly observe something, I know that it still exists. When a child loses a toy, for instance, or can't find something, they may become distressed if they haven't acquired object permanence yet. So this helps us to understand some of infants' behavior when it comes to not being able to necessarily be or observe directly something that they want. So if mom goes around the corner, for instance, They may cry because they don't understand that, hey, mom still exists, I just can't see her. This is why games like Peekaboo are so fun for kids, because you exist, and now you don't exist, and now you're back. And so it's this really sort of interesting existential magic trick for them. On your Canvas shell, you'll see a link for the sensory motor stage and object permanence example. So there's a video embedded here that shows you some of the classic tools or assessment that's used to demonstrate that a child has actually achieved object permanence. You also have a few slides at the end of this presentation that go over language development milestones. So these are the ages at which we should start to see some of these language acquisition and expression milestones. So if a child is not denoting or exhibiting some of these behaviors or attempting some of these behaviors at these ages, that may be an indicator, not necessarily that a child is delayed or that there is an issue that needs to be addressed, but it may be something that could point us in the direction of mentioning it to a pediatrician or keeping an eye on it to see if the child catches up. So these are pretty broad general guidelines. Not every child fits within these approximate ages, but it's a nice tool to use to make sure that a child is staying on track and that we don't necessarily need to intervene. And if it's been a while and we've passed this age or past these approximate ages for these milestones, that would show us that it's time to start looking into maybe some resources or tools to get them back on track. And the last presentation you have is on emotional and social development. So in our toddler years, we're starting to realize that there's a whole range of ways to feel. That being a human being is pretty complicated, and that we can also experience multiple emotions at the same time, right? We can be happy and sad at the same time, right? That bittersweet feeling. We can be angry and sad at the same time. We can feel embarrassed and guilty at the same time. So we're starting to learn some of these self-conscious emotions. So it's going to be really important for the adults in a child's life to, in a healthy, comprehensive way, show children some acceptable ways to express emotion and ways to cope and deal with emotions that don't make us feel so great. So emotional self-regulation is going to be important. This is important in terms of how the adults in a child's life contribute to how children regulate these internal states and emotions that they are now experiencing, which are relatively new to them. And so when it comes to being able to control and exert control over their own behaviors, we know that the first year of life, a lot of this control simply comes from brain development. So the brain is growing significantly in that first year. And that higher order brain, even though it's a little behind the growth of the downstairs brain, that upstairs brain and its development is going to contribute to our ability to impede and inhibit our own behaviors. But in our second year of life, as we're getting into our toddler years, we're better able to express ourselves through language. So it's going to be really those leaps and bounds that we make, those word spurts, the ability to really absorb language and then now have the tools to express it verbally and to align that with what we're feeling. That's going to help us in our emotional regulation as we age into toddlerhood. You have a few slides here on attachment. So attachment is very important. We'll talk much more about attachment even as we get into early childhood. So make sure you take a look at these attachment slides. You also have a section in the Canvas shell at the bottom of the infancy section called Attachment Theory Stages that will walk you through the more commonly denoted patterns in the first year of life, and then these attachment types from developmental researchers Ainsworth and Bowlby. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we pay some attention to self-control and how the adults in a child's life can help develop self-control in toddlers. So we are going to be good models for this. All right, thanks.